I'm ToejahM, and I'm here to talk to you about why the bucket should be nerfed. Listen, before you berate me, I love Sea of Thieves, and if I made a video on all the things I loved about the game, we'd be here for quite a while. With that said, the bucket is broken, and I'm going to tell you why. Let me preface this first though by saying that I'm mostly solo, which I do live on Twitch most days of the week, and even though nerfing the bucket turns me into a glass cannon, I'm all for it. The short take on why is that if you nerf the bucket, you'll see far less boarding and spawn camping because fights will be dictated by those with the higher accuracy with their cannons, which if you ask me, that's how ship versus ship battles should go. Boarding a ship should be for taking their stuff, not for sinking them, but the respawn timer is so short, it results in spawn camping to even be able to sink a ship. Side note here, supplies should 100% float up after they're sunk. Let me explain this in more detail though. Think about it. There are very few games where, in player versus player, the defensive capabilities are stronger than offensive capabilities. In Battlefield, for example, it took more than the full crew of a tank to outheal the damage from one tank shooting at it. You have to retreat behind cover or outshoot the enemy, hoping they'd miss one of their shots. And trading with an enemy who got the first hit was bad, but it rewarded better positioning or juking a good shot. In EverQuest 2, any class that could do insane damage did little healing, and any class that did insane healing did little damage. But often it was still bested by the initial burst damage of a DPS class, even when both had equally good gear for their level. We're not going to talk about the Ring of Repulsion though. In Escape from Tarkov, you have no way of out-healing direct incoming fire at all. You have to find cover if you survive, before you're able to stitch on your arms. Healing at the wrong moment is what can actually get you killed. When it comes to Sea of Thieves, think of the bucket as that thing that heals your ship in the middle of a fight. One of the biggest issues that gives strength to the bucket and rewards boarding a ship in most cases against competent crews is trying to maintain accurate fire onto a target while sailing is very difficult. This is due to the angles being limited. You can't angle your cannon from facing forward or to the rear. You have a very short arc in which you can get your shots off with. Then you have to contend with the waves which throw you around, and the ability to disable a ship is down to you boarding and anchoring them or using a special type of cannonball which isn't readily available right when you start sailing. And sure, you can disable the masts, but rarely in one pass, and certainly not against bigger ships before they repair. Hitting the same spot multiple points on a ship is actually counterproductive, in that you don't weaken the ship anymore and you just waste supplies, bringing you back down to the war of attrition. So whichever ship has the most supplies tends to be the one that comes out on top, and this is dictated by whoever's on the server first, or whichever ship gets luckiest in finding the supplies. I've landed the best part of 100 cannonballs on a galleon and lost the fight because I was knocked off the ship and the mermaid didn't want to spawn for me. They'd landed around 5 shots on my ship by this point, and I slowly sank. Sinking a ship right now largely revolves around keeping the crew dead, and this leads to a poor experience for the crew that you're fighting because after a few respawns, they feel griefed. You can use the scuttle argument all you like, but pride stops 90% of the crews from using it because they think that they can claw it back, throw in their ship only having one hull, and this is a very lengthy process. By all means, say that the attacking crew should back off and try a different method, but they won't. They've already earned their place on the enemy ship. Now they just have to wait for it to sink. So how do we fix this? The supply-based war of attrition that happens more often than not aside, I think that the bucket needs to be nerfed. Personally, and I reiterate before I give you my fix, I play mostly solo, so this hurts me a lot, turning me into a more fragile glass cannon than I already am. I think you should be better rewarded with being good with your cannons, and a big culprit that too heavily nullifies your cannon fire is that the bucket is too strong. It should be nerfed by at least 50%, and the players killed holding a full bucket of water should drop that back onto the ship. If you nerf the bucket, this is likely what will happen if the correct value is applied. 50% is my ballpark shocker figure, but someone with more smarts can tweak that. I got some basic statistics here for you. I did a little bit of science before I made this video, and I was shocked to find out just how strong the bucket actually is. Now I've sailed into the Red Sea and bucketed for so long with my sloop that the ship sunk on a timer and not because it was full of water. But if I give you some solid statistics, maybe you'll see my point of view too. I filled up each ship to almost sinking point and bailed the ship, then counted the amount of buckets needed. With the sloop, I filled it up to just around about here and started bucketing. It took me 5 buckets to fully empty my sloop, with the last bucket only being a small smidge. Now 5 doesn't sound too bad, right? But that's solo. If you're with a crewmate, it will take you 2.5 buckets to completely empty your ship from being full. Then I switched over to the brig and filled it up to where I think the sinking point is and bucketed the brig. It took me 7 buckets to empty the brig completely, with again the last bucket being a smidge. Again, this sounds perfectly fine. But then you remember that a brig has a crew of 3. So with each crew member bailing, they only need to bail 2.3 buckets to fully empty the brig. This means that each bucket empties around 14% of what is currently in the hull. Then I moved on to the Galleen. With the Galleen, I did the same thing. I filled the Galleen up to the brim, and then I bucketed it. It took me 10 buckets to fully empty a Galleen, with again at the end it only being a smidge. Again, this sounds fine, right? But then you remember that there's a crew of 4 on a Galleen, which means for a Galleen to fully empty its ship, each crew member only needs to bail 2.5 buckets. Seeing the numbers, I hope will help you understand how broken the bucket is. By itself, each bucket per crew member on a sloop is 20%. On a brig is 14, and a Galleen is 10. But you multiply these by each crew member per ship in one run with a bucket each, the sloop can bail 40%, the brig 42%, and the Galleen 40%, which is insane. On both the Galleen and the brig, there are definitely amounts of damage that can be done below deck to each ship that is unrecoverable in some situations. On a sloop, when 2 crew members are both actively bucketing, you just can't sink them. And with the brig and the Galleen, you're very rarely going to get these ships to a point where they can't out-bucket the damage that you're doing. On a Galleen, it's slightly different because you can use a ballast ball so you can prep their top deck, which a lot of crews don't plan for. But that is an exception to the rule. And even then, they can still hold the ship afloat. Let's talk about the pros of nerfing the bucket. If you nerf the bucket, it's going to make cannon accuracy top dog, which will give us not only epic ship battles, but it will mean that fights on the seas will be largely dictated by ship versus ship, as the players needing to board you. Less players trying to board another ship removes the boarding meta, and this means less saltiness due to less player kills needed to watch the slowly sinking ship. This takes away a lot of the personal side when it comes to boarding and fighting other players. This doesn't mean that players won't be able to board you. They'll still be able to try and board you, but that means that they'll do it at a larger risk to their own ship, especially if they die while they're not on the ship. It means that really, they need to have done enough damage or crippled you enough that they're able to board you and finish the job without it being a griefing fest. Bringing it back to cannons bridges the skill gap between mouse and keyboard versus controller, due to requiring less precision of a cannonball versus a large target. I personally use WSAD to move my cannon anyway, so I don't use the mouse. Mouse movement is often slower and less accurate as well. The only real difference here between mouse and keyboard and controller is when it becomes to pirate versus pirate. Taking the boarding meta mostly out of the game here means that having a better sailing skill rewards you, because you're able to put yourself in a better position or get out of tight situations. You're also able to force ships to make mistakes like crashing into rocks. Both of these open your crew up to being able to create more holes in the other ship, and the more holes you create in the ship, the quicker they're going to sink. Now don't get me wrong, I like fighting other players directly. I just really don't feel like it has a place when you're in the middle of the ocean. I think that those kind of fights should be largely dictated by ship versus ship, and there really shouldn't be much player interaction other than using the megaphone. As with any change to any game, there's undoubtedly going to be some cons. The cons to nerfing the bucket, I think what will happen is ships will run sooner if they take too much damage too early on. Running is another issue which needs to be addressed regardless. Ships should be slower with more damage done, water in the hull should make them slower, and general extra weight from gold should make them slower, but this is a topic for another time. Another con is they may just engage in less fights in general, which is absolutely fine. I think that once a ship is engaged in you, it's far more frustrating than when they just cut and run, if they avoid you altogether. Another con here is that it makes the game less casual, which can be remedied by some kind of matchmaking, i.e. stop putting me on servers where I have over 2,000 hours played, maxed out reputations, and thousands of ships sunk against a server full of people who just bought the game. I loaded it into the arena recently, and I heard someone say, how do I draw my sword? Back to the cons. PvE will be harder. This is something that can be balanced with small holes being created by PvE, as we have the tier system that goes from a tier 1 hole to a tier 3 hole. I don't have all the answers, and I'm sure there'll be things I've overlooked, and issues that will come up beyond this. Values may be wrong, but what I do know is that ship vs ship battles are far more enjoyable all round, and while fighting directly with another pirate is fun, it's not something that should be happening every time you engage in a ship fight. If you want to fight directly with other players, play a different game. In a game where the ocean is so beautiful and the ship fights are so epic, we should be trying to promote this kind of gameplay. I've been ToejahM, and I've been your temporary ship's captain. And I'll see you later.
I love it.
You mean you want your sails in the wind when we have it? Really?
Yeah. Wow.
What is this? What kind of tomfoolery is this?
You're making
Yeah,
stuff
that was
up
the
as you
first
go
one,
along.
mate.
You Sumo 4332 wouldn't do that.
I hate you so much right now.